A little boy near the front screamed and pointed beneath the altar. The church exploded. Women grabbed their children, people jumped over chairs and rushed towards the doors. A microphone stand crashed to the floor as everyone scrambled to escape. Pastor Jude stood frozen behind the pulpit. Then he looked down. A large dark snake was slowly pushing its head through a crack in the floor beneath the altar. Jude's face went pale. He had seen that snake before, not in real life, in a dream. The snake lifted its head and stared directly at him. Pastor Jude backed away. Jesus! He quickly looked around for something he could use to kill it. He spotted a heavy wooden stand and reached for it. But before he could grab it, the snake disappeared. Pastor Jude froze. He looked behind the altar, nothing. Under the pulpit, nothing. The snake was gone. But the chaos outside had already begun. People were still running from the church when an old woman suddenly screamed, "Help me!" Mama Blessing had been trying to make her way out with the others, but she could not move fast enough. The snake had bitten her. By the time someone reached her, she was clutching her leg and crying. She was rushed to the hospital. Doctors treated the bite and administered antivenom, but her condition did not improve. Instead, her leg began to swell. At first, everyone thought it was part of the injury. Then, the swelling became worse. Days passed. The skin stretched until the leg looked painfully swollen. Then the wound began to deteriorate. A terrible smell followed. When people came to visit Mama Blessing, some could barely remain in the room. They covered their noses. Others stepped outside to breathe. Mama Blessing could no longer walk. Her family spent money on treatment after treatment, but nothing seemed to stop the deterioration. When Pastor Jude heard how bad things had become, he went to her house himself. He knelt beside her bed and prayed. He prayed until his voice became hoarse. But when he opened his eyes, Mama Blessing's leg looked exactly the same. Nothing had changed. Soon, people began saying the snake bite was not ordinary. Some said it was spiritual. Others told the family to seek help elsewhere. So, they took Mama Blessing from one spiritual house to another. Still, her condition worsened. She became weak, and every day, her family prepared themselves for the possibility that she might not survive. The story terrified the entire community. Parents began warning their children, "Don't go near that church." Some parents stopped attending altogether. Then the rumors started. People whispered that Pastor Jude was a ritualist. They said he worshipped snakes. And then the worst rumors spread. Anyone bitten by the snake, they claimed, was being used as a sacrifice. Pastor Jude heard the accusations. He was devastated. But instead of abandoning the church, he decided to confront whatever had entered it. The Saturday before the next Sunday service, he went to the church alone. He walked around the compound, praying. He prayed over the doors, the chairs, the altar. Then he anointed the altar. By Sunday morning, the church was almost empty. Pastor Jude stood at the entrance and stared at the few people who had come. Only four people. He turned to one of the ushers. "Where is everybody?" The usher looked nervous. "They are afraid of the snake, sir." Pastor Jude stared at him. For a moment, he had no words. Then he walked to the pulpit. "Let's begin." He was about preaching when the usher screamed. Everyone turned. He was gripping his leg. His face had twisted in pain. "What's wrong?" Pastor Jude shouted. The man looked down. A snake was moving beside his foot. He had been bitten. The three people screamed and ran. Pastor Jude rushed towards the usher, but the man collapsed. The snake disappeared before anyone could catch it. The usher was taken to the hospital. The news spread through the community before sunset. By the following morning, he was dead. His body lay motionless on the hospital bed. His family broke down. His brother could not accept it. Grief quickly turned into rage. By afternoon, he had gathered an angry mob. They marched towards the church carrying sticks, stones, and containers of fuel. "Burn the church! Bring out the pastor! We will not let him kill another person!" Pastor Jude was inside the church when he heard the shouting. He stepped outside. "Please!" The mob stopped. "This is the house of God," he pleaded. "Don't burn it. If you have questions, please talk to me." Nobody wanted to listen. "You used my brother for ritual." "No, I didn't." The pastor barely finished speaking before someone struck him. He stumbled. Another blow landed, then another. Pastor Jude fell to the ground as the mob kicked and beat him. "Stop!" An elderly man passing along the road rushed towards them. "Have you all gone mad? You're going to kill this man?" The mob finally backed away. Pastor Jude was left lying on the ground, blood running from his face. The elderly man knelt beside him. "Pastor, can you hear me?" Pastor Jude tried to answer, but his voice barely came out. The man called for help. The pastor was rushed to the hospital. Mama Blessing heard the news before the sun went down. She lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her injured leg throbbed beneath the bedsheet. If the usher had died from the same snake bite, what chance did she have? Her breathing became faster. "Is this how I will die?" She looked towards the corner of the room. For a moment, she imagined seeing the snake there. She squeezed her eyes shut. But that night, sleep brought no relief. She kept dreaming about the snake. In one dream, it was crawling towards her bed. In another, she stood beside a coffin. She woke up screaming. Fear took over everything. Her pain, her thoughts. She began wondering whether she would ever see another morning. Exhausted and desperate, she lay alone on her bed and stared at the ceiling. She began to cry. "God, I was never a Christian. I don't even have any business in the church. I only went there because my child told me about Christ." She took a shaky breath. "God, if you're truly alive, Jesus, if you truly exist, please look past my sin. Please look past my unbelief. Look past my unfaithfulness. Look past my failing faith and my doubt." She gripped the bedsheet. "Please heal me by your mercy. Don't let me die." Her voice became almost a whisper. "Take away this pain." She wasn't following any prayer formula. She wasn't trying to sound religious. She was simply a woman in pain, crying out because she had nowhere else to turn. The moment she finished speaking, thunder shook the house. She turned towards the window. The sky was clear. There was no dark clouds. She stared outside for several seconds. What was that? Nothing else happened. Eventually, she lay back down. For the first time in days, she slept peacefully. Then, she dreamed. An elderly man stood before her. He was dressed in traditional native attire. His face was calm. He looked directly at her and said, "Be of good faith, for I have overcome the world." Mama Blessing woke up to a strange absence. The terrible pain was gone. She pushed herself out of the bed and took a few cautious steps across the room. She could walk. Yesterday, she had been bedridden. Today, she was standing on the same leg everyone thought would kill her. Mama Blessing stared at her leg in disbelief. She had no explanation, but for the first time since the snake bite, she believed she might actually live. Pastor Jude was still recovering in the hospital. His wife sat beside his bed, but there was little comfort in her silence. She was angry, terrified, and exhausted. She had watched her husband nearly get beaten to death because of a church that was now being blamed for 2 snake attacks. She had spent days wondering what would happen to him next. When Pastor Jude was discharged, she could no longer keep quiet. She confronted him about everything: the church, the dead usher, the mob. To her, None of it was worth risking his life over. Then she said the one thing she had never dared to say so bluntly. "You were not called to pastor a church. You called yourself." The words cut deeper than everything else she had said. Pastor Jude said nothing. His wife kept going, reminding him that she had warned him from the beginning, but he had refused to listen. She walked away, still upset. But Jude remained where he was, staring into space. One sentence kept replaying in his mind. "You were not called, you called yourself." That night, he could not sleep. He turned from one side of the bed to the other. The words kept coming back. "You were not called. You forcefully called yourself." He closed his eyes. Still, he heard them. And for the first time, he stopped trying to defend himself. He asked himself a question he had avoided for years. What if she was right? The answer began taking him back 10 years. Before the church, before the crowds. Pastor Jude had always been an intercessor. When people came to him for prayer, strange things happened. Problems that had lingered for years suddenly changed. One woman had been trying to have a child for several years. She had visited hospitals, sought help in many places, but nothing worked. Then she met Jude. He prayed for her. Then the woman eventually became pregnant. She was overwhelmed with joy. She promised to give Jude a gift. So when she asked what he wanted, he didn't know what to say. Then she gave him a piece of land. "This is yours," she told him. Jude looked at the land and began thinking, if people are receiving answers when I pray for them, if God has given me this gift, then perhaps this is a ministry. And that was where the mistake began. He decided to build a church. One evening, while he was returning from the land, an elderly woman stopped him. She pointed towards the property. "Don't build anything there." Jude laughed. "What do you mean? Leave that land alone." He dismissed her and went home. That evening, he told his wife. Instead of agreeing with him, she asked, "Have you asked God whether you should build a church?" Jude frowned. "God has already given me the gift. That doesn't answer my question." He became defensive. "If people pray through me and receive answers, what else am I supposed to do?" "Go and pray. Go and ask God." So he did. He prayed, he waited, he asked, but heard nothing. No clear instruction, no confirmation, just silence. Eventually, Jude decided that God's silence meant approval. His wife disagreed, but he had already made up his mind. Construction began. Then, more warnings came. People around the area whispered that the land had once been a shrine. Others said dark rituals are taking place there. Jude heard the rumors. Instead of stopping, he remembered the stories he had heard about great preachers who built churches in places people considered spiritually dangerous. If God can establish a church there, why not here? He became even more determined. Then the dream started. Snakes, again and again. But he ignored them. The church was eventually completed. And what happened next made Jude believe he had made the right decision. The church grew. People were healed. Prayers were answered. Miracles happened. The building became crowded every Sunday. Years passed. For 10 years, Jude never questioned the decision that had started it all, until an angry mob nearly killed him. Now, lying awake in the darkness, Jude finally understood what he had refused to understand for years. He had received a gift, but the gift was not the same thing as a calling. He had assumed that because God answered prayers through him, God had instructed him to build a church. He had led himself and then called it God's leading. Pastor Jude sat up in bed. Tears filled his eyes. "Lord," his voice broke, "I was wrong." He bowed his head. "I thought because you gave me a gift, I could decide what to do with it. I am so sorry. I didn't wait for you." He remembered every warning he had ignored, and suddenly, the weight of 10 years came crashing down on him. He began to cry. "Forgive me, Lord. He stayed there for a long time. No excuses, no defense, just repentance. From today, Lord, I will let you lead me. He lowered his head. I will follow you. For the first time in 10 years, Pastor Jude surrendered his decision completely. The following morning, Pastor Jude told his wife they had to leave. The shame, the accusations, and everything that had happened had become too much for him. The church was no longer a place he could enter without remembering the snake, the dead usher, and the mob. He no longer felt he could remain in that environment and continue pretending everything was normal. His wife understood. Within a week, they had packed their belongings and relocated to another state, leaving the church and everything connected to it behind. They didn't talk about building another church. They simply settled down and began living quietly. Jude returned to what he knew he had actually been called to do. He prayed, he helped people, he served God. But he no longer tried to build something God had never told him to build. Mama Blessing made a full recovery. The swelling disappeared, the wound healed, and she eventually walked normally again. But the experience had changed her. She remembered the night she cried out to Jesus, the strange thunder that followed, and the old man who appeared in her dream. She could no longer dismiss Christ as something she didn't understand. After her recovery, Mama Blessing found another church and began fellowshipping there, not out of fear, but because she now wanted to know the Jesus she had cried out to in her darkest moments. About a month later, a journalist became interested in the story. The snake, the church, the old woman who nearly died, the usher who didn't survive, and the pastor who eventually abandoned the church. The journalist wanted answers, so she began digging. She searched old records. She interviewed elderly residents who knew the history of the land. Then she discovered something that changed the entire story. The land had once belonged to a powerful spiritualist. People in the area had known him for years. According to the accounts she gathered, he was deeply involved in the worship of a snake. His followers believed the snake had to receive blood sacrifices at certain times, and according to the old accounts, the spiritualist had maintained the practice for decades. Then he died. His only daughter inherited everything, but she refused to continue her father's practices. She wanted nothing to do with them. And according to the journalist's investigation, the family had always believed that her long struggle with barrenness was connected to her refusal to continue the tradition. For years, she had remained childless. Then, she met Jude. He prayed for her. She became pregnant. That experience convinced her that the God Jude served was greater than the power her father had worshipped. So, she gave Jude the land, but she never told him anything about its history. She simply handed it over, and he built a church on it. 10 years later, the altar cracked, the snake appeared, and everything that followed came crashing down. The journalist eventually published her findings as a special investigative report. The story spread. People who had spent months blaming Pastor Jude suddenly had another piece of the puzzle. But Jude wasn't interested in defending himself anymore. He watched the report quietly from his new home. When it ended, he sat there for several seconds. His wife looked at him. "What are you thinking?" Jude shook his head slowly. "I understand now." "Understand what?" He looked at her. "Not every battle is ours to fight. I thought I was doing something great for God," he said. "But I never stopped to ask whether God had actually sent me." His wife said nothing. Jude looked back at the television. The evil on that land wasn't greater than God. He paused. "My mistake was thinking that because I had the ability to do something, God had given me permission to do it." He lowered his eyes. "I should have listened." That lesson stayed with him. He had spent 10 years trying to prove that nothing could stop what he believed God had called him to build. But the truth was much simpler. God does not need us to fight battles He never assigned to us. Sometimes obedience means building. Sometimes obedience means living. And sometimes the most spiritual thing a person can do is stop, pray, and wait for God to say, go or don't. Judah finally learned the difference. I hope you enjoyed today's story. There is more to enjoy right here on your screen. Click to watch the next story now. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.